Welcome to Good Mythical Morning, where we deconstruct everything, except our own self-worship.
Hey, did you know that Christians who deconstruct have abandoned the authority of God and made themselves their own authority, essentially becoming their own God?
So, you agree with the warning but think admitting it makes it invalid? Oh, Rhett, the irony. God gave you a camera, charisma, and a cult following, and you still used it to promote yourself as a god. That's not mythical. That's just tragic.
You may have heard that before. I definitely have, because I used to think it and I used to say it.
Used to say? Bro, you just explained exactly how you became your own pope, priest, and prophet with a YouTube channel.
That is, until I deconstructed. I may have put it a little less harshly and said something like, you're leaning on your own understanding instead of leaning on God, but the implication was clear. These people who deconstructed were pridefully trusting themselves rather than trusting God.
You admit the implication was true, then proceed to prove it by your own story. You're not rebutting the claim. You're illustrating it.
No, of course, I see things differently now. I don't speak for everyone who's deconstructed or is deconstructing, but I do think that it's helpful because there's so much talk about it to hear from somebody who's sort of been through the process, because I think we can all understand one another a little bit better.
That's like saying, I don't speak for all arsonists, but let me explain why burning down my house felt honest.
My deconstruction didn't start with a decision to lean on my own understanding. And honestly, it felt a lot like the opposite of that. When I was a Christian, I spent a lot of time making sure that what I believed was true. And that usually meant going to sources that had arguments that supported what I already believed.
So, you admit you used confirmation bias. And your solution? Switch to a new confirmation bias, this time against Christianity.
To those sources to develop a defense plan.
So let me get this straight. You went to defend your faith, but the moment resistance showed up, you surrendered your sword and joined the enemy camp. That's not research. That's a spiritual Stockholm syndrome.
And that's when I learned that the bulk of people in a lot of different disciplines, whether that be biology or astronomy, geology, psychology, anthropology, archaeology, neuroscience, and in some cases, biblical studies, had come to conclusions that called my particular conservative evangelical Christian belief system into question.
None of those fields study God. They study nature. You left theology because geologists didn't confirm Genesis 1.
This shook me up a lot, and for the first time in my life, I seriously considered the question, what if I'm wrong? I'd never really done that before. I kept reading, and eventually I got to, I think I might be wrong. And then I kept reading some more, and eventually I landed on, I'm pretty sure I'm wrong.
That's not reasoning. That's escalation through emotional exposure. You're mistaking cognitive instability for epistemic growth. Text.
I was scared. I was unsettled. I was confused. But I felt like I had a choice. I, a guy with only a bachelor's degree who had read a few books, could conclude that all these people who had devoted their lives to studying these subjects so deeply were wrong. Or I could trust them, essentially leaning on their understanding.
Replace experts with popular opinion, and it's the same logic that made Flat Earth cool again on YouTube.
I can already hear the old me saying, aha, I got you. You made the mistake of trusting human wisdom over God's wisdom. I never talk like that, but I don't think that that is quite the gotcha that my old self thinks that it is, because I think that my particular understanding of God back in those days was actually based on my adherence to a very particular school of thought about God.
Saying, it's not a gotcha, doesn't make it less true. You literally admit you trusted human wisdom over divine revelation.
A 21st century American conservative evangelical Christian one. And so even though I would have told you that I got my view of God from the Bible and from the Holy Spirit, that's what I was trusting, I was actually getting my understanding of the Bible and the Holy Spirit, how the Holy Spirit worked, from people, specifically conservative, or mostly conservative evangelical Christians. So I was trusting in a group of people in both scenarios.
So you're saying all trust and interpretation is equal? Then why prefer one over the other? By that logic, trusting your Uber driver is just as valid as trusting the surgeon doing your heart surgery.
And I feel like I've got sufficient reason to choose to trust the specialist. I mean, I'm not going to try to convince you of that. That's a whole other video in and of itself, but that's the conclusion that I came to. I mean, they don't claim to be infallible or inerrant, but I do believe that they are my best hope at understanding what is actually true. Now, I am not saying that there aren't Christians who agree with scientific truth.
Reductio. They're not perfect, but they're my best hope. Says who? You. So you are still the ultimate authority.
In fact, some of the experts that I read in those areas, especially initially, were in fact Christians. So making a decision to trust the specialists did not necessitate me no longer being a Christian. It's just that trusting them necessitated me becoming a different kind of Christian than I was.
If you were looking for truth, not comfort, why does it matter if some were Christian? You're not following evidence, you're following vibes.
Eventually, in my case, following that rabbit hole led to my deconversion. It's a long story. There's several podcasts about it. It's probably going to be a bore.
You admit, trusting man over God inevitably led to apostasy, which proves your original claim. Deconstruction leads to self-deification.
And listen, I could still be wrong. I still ask myself that on a regular basis. What if I'm wrong? I mean, listen, maybe all these PhDs are deceived. Maybe they're all a victim to some sort of agenda, or they're perpetrating some sort of agenda. That's not the impression that I get.
So you might be wrong, but you'll keep living like you're right. That's not skepticism. That's willful self-deception.
At the end of the day, I think you can develop your understanding of people who have deconstructed by listening to what other people say about them, or you can just listen to them and take them at their word.
Reductio. Don't trust what others say about us, trust us. That's the same logic cults use. Only listen to our testimony, not external critique. Bottom line. Rhett's entire argument collapses under reductio ad absurdum. He admits the core problem, trusting man over God, rebrands it as a journey, then abandons objective authority in favor of personal peace. He didn't follow truth. He followed comfort. He didn't prove Christianity false. He proved that man is his own idol. Edge of truth. Where truth hurts. But it heals.